The ASUS ZenBook Pro Duo is an interesting laptop. It's got two screens rather than your usual one. Although this isn't exactly advertised as a gaming laptop, as it's got such good specs, it's definitely capable of playing games. And to be fair, I could see a lot of people using something like this to play a game while having other content on the second screen. So let's find out how well it performs and compare it against some other laptops to see the differences. Just quickly before we jump into the benchmark results, I'll cover off the specs in my unit. I've got the highest spec'd option, so there's an Intel i9-9980HK CPU, NVIDIA RTX 2060 graphics, and 32GB of memory running in dual channel. The ZenBook Pro Duo is also available with different specs, so expect different results with different configurations. You can find examples and updated prices linked in the description. There's a button directly above the touchpad that allows you to swap between auto and turbo mode. I've tested all games in turbo mode, which should give better performance. We'll only be covering gaming performance in this video, so if you're new to the channel, you'll definitely want to get subscribed for the upcoming full review. This is where I'll be testing out the dual screens in depth. Let's start out by going through all 20 games at all setting levels. Then afterwards, we'll see how the ASUS ZenBook Pro Duo compares with some other laptops and see if having something running on the second screen affects game performance. Battlefield 5 was tested in campaign mode, and I've got the results with RTX on shown by the green bars and RTX off shown by the purple bars. With RTX off, it was still quite playable at ultra settings, no problems there. With RTX on, it was fine at medium settings. However, as usual, in my opinion, it both looks and performs better with RTX off and ultra settings. Battlefield 1 was also tested in campaign mode, and like always, it's running well and performing better than the newer Battlefield 5 just shown. Over 100 FPS averages at max settings, though as usual with this game, I found the 1% low result a little inconsistent. Apex Legends was either tested with all settings at maximum or all settings at the lowest possible values, as it doesn't have predefined setting presets. A recent NVIDIA driver update boosted performance of this game, so the results may be hard to compare against my previous numbers. In any case, it was running just fine at max settings. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was tested with the built-in benchmark. Normally at lower settings, most laptops with a modern i7 CPU with minimal throttling will reach above 110 FPS. But we'll see how this game compares against some other laptops soon. Far Cry New Dawn was tested with the built-in benchmark, and the results here were quite poor considering the specs. This tends to be a CPU-heavy game, and the frame rates were 10 to 20 FPS lower than lower spec machines I've recently tested. The Acer Nitro 5 with 1660 Ti in this instance. Far Cry 5 was also tested with the built-in benchmark, and the results were ahead of the newer Far Cry New Dawn just covered. And again, we'll see how this one compares to some other laptops later. Fortnite was tested with the replay feature, and even maxed out at epic settings, we're still able to average above 100 FPS, while even the 1% low is above the refresh rate of the display, so it should play just fine on this machine without any problems, as you'd expect with this level of hardware. Overwatch is another well-optimized game that was tested in the practice range. Once more, the performance was quite good as this game runs well enough on basically any modern machine with basic gaming chops. Although it was again performing behind the other lower spec machines I've recently tested, there are still absolutely no issues playing at max settings. CSGO was tested using the Uletical FPS benchmark, and as is pretty much always the case, high FPS from this test. However, despite this, once more, the frame rates were lower compared against lower spec machines. For instance, the thermally throttled Nitro 5 with i7 and 1660 Ti scored 22% higher FPS at max settings. Rainbow Six Siege was tested with the built-in benchmark. Even with maximum ultra settings, we're still above 100 FPS. However, like other games mentioned, the results are still a little behind some other lower spec machines. Metro Exodus was tested using the built-in benchmark. Most parts of the game perform a fair bit better than this, so don't take these results as a good indication of what to expect throughout the entire game. It's more of a worst case, but does let you perform the same test to compare against. The Division 2 was also tested with the built-in benchmark. This test was just a little behind 60 FPS even with ultra settings, with up to 100 hit with low settings. And this is after a recent NVIDIA update allegedly improved performance for this title. PUBG was tested using the replay feature, and despite the average FPS looking quite good, the 1% lows were around 20 FPS lower compared to other lower spec machines I've tested due to some CPU throttling issues, which I'll detail in the upcoming full review. Assassin's Creed Odyssey was tested with the built-in benchmark. And as a test that typically smashes the CPU, we're seeing some pretty poor results here. Just for comparison, at low settings where we're more CPU bound, the 1% low from the Nitro 5 with i7 CPU is ahead of even the average we're getting here on the Pro Duo. Dota 2 was tested playing in the middle lane with an average amount of action going on, and was another game where the average frame rates were still good, but the 1% lows were notably down. However, when it comes down to it, we've only got a 60Hz screen, and these results are realistically still plenty for this game. Watch Dogs 2 is a game that loves smashing CPU resources, so you'd think the 8 cores we have would be a great match for it. While it was still playable at ultra settings, the frame rates were noticeably lower at higher settings, but hey, it still does run okay. Ghost Recon Wildlands is another resource-heavy game, and was tested with the built-in benchmark. And once more, the results are down compared to lower-spec machines. Those 60 FPS averages were still hit at very high settings. The Witcher 3 didn't see too much performance loss, as this game seems to be more GPU-heavy, and I found it would still play well enough even with ultra settings, so no issues here. Doom was tested using Vulkan, and is a game that usually produces very high frame rates. There did seem to be something wrong here though. The 1% low results were about half the amount I'd expect from this game on similar hardware. Despite this, the 1% low results were still technically above the refresh rate of the display, and it did still play smoothly. Strange Brigade was another game that was tested with Vulkan, but was tested with the built-in benchmark. And for once the results are actually a little better here. Well, at least in terms of average FPS. Probably due to a recent Nvidia driver update where they announced an increase in this title. Let's also take a look at how this config of the ASUS ZenBook Pro Duo compares with other laptops. Use these results as a rough guide only, as they were tested at different times with different drivers. In Battlefield 5, I've got the ASUS ZenBook Pro Duo highlighted in red near similarly spec'd machines. In this case, it's performing similarly to most of the other 2060 laptops covered, with the exception being the Triton 500 just ahead of it. However, that does undervolt the CPU by default, and also boost up the wattage of the 2060, giving it an advantage. This game does seem to favour more cores, which I think is why the 1% low is higher than the other stock i7s. These are the results from Far Cry 5 with ultra settings and the built-in benchmark, and it's more of a CPU demanding test. In this test, we're seeing the lowest results from a 2060 based laptop, and this seems to be due to the CPU throttling that was taking place. And this is mirrored by the 1% low performance that's placing behind the last gen i7 8750H. These are the results from Shadow of the Tomb Raider with the built-in benchmark at highest settings. Again, the results were on the lower side out of the 2060 machines tested, matching the throttled Dell G5 with lower tier CPU in this test. Next, let's take a look and see how much of a performance loss we can expect by using the second screen with some different workloads. For all the previously tested games, I just left the secondary screen empty. I'll be comparing these results with 2 more workloads, watching a YouTube video in Chrome and using OBS to stream the game on the second screen. Battlefield 5 was tested with ultra settings. The bottom bar is just the result we saw before with nothing on the second screen. Then with a YouTube video playing on the second screen, there was no real difference. While streaming, there was a performance hit as expected, as the encoding process does use system resources. However, the game still performed well enough considering this is max settings, and it was very nice to be able to watch OBS while playing full screen. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was tested with the built-in benchmark using highest settings. Again, there were no differences in the game FPS between nothing on the bottom screen and just watching a YouTube video. So although the Intel GPU is doing more work to display this image, it's not negatively affecting the game, while again streaming lowered the performance as expected. Far Cry 5 was also tested using the built-in benchmark with ultra settings. This time, there was actually a difference in performance by having a simple YouTube video playing on the second screen. I triple checked this and the results were consistent. So it just goes to show that the performance will vary by game as well as based on what you've got on the bottom screen. Overall, the ASUS ZenBook Pro Duo is performing well enough. It's a little lower than what you'd typically expect from these specs due to some throttling. However, it's still more than capable of running any modern game with higher settings no problem. To be fair, again, this isn't advertised as a gaming laptop. I just thought it would be interesting to see what it's capable of, as many people are interested in a machine where they can play games on one screen and have something else on the second screen. When it comes down to it, it is still able to play all of these games without issue. Just don't expect the absolute best performance compared to other options with similar specs. If you're not interested in the second screen, then it would make more sense to look elsewhere. That really is the key feature here. If you are interested in seeing what the second screen can do, then look out for the upcoming full review video, as I'll have a lot more testing of it covered there. This is only my second time testing the i9-9980HK CPU. So far, I haven't found it to make too much of a difference in games. However, we'll see how it helps in more creative-focused workloads in the upcoming full review. Let me know what you thought of the gaming performance from the new ASUS ZenBook Pro Duo laptop down in the comments. And if you're new to the channel, you'll definitely want to get subscribed for the full review to see everything this machine has to offer.